Welcome to the Deep Dive. We're a show dedicated to cracking open complex literary architecture and, well, delivering the absolute core of what you need to know fast.
That's the idea.
Today, we are immersing ourselves, really getting into the relentless, sprawling world David Szalay created in his acclaimed 2025 novel, Flesh. We're not here just to, summarize the story of István. We're digging deeper. We are analyzing the precise mechanics of his journey.
Exactly. How Szalay engineered this protagonist's life from that really small, quite humiliating teenage start
Yeah.
all the way to that grim, definitive full circle ending, and all in just over 300 pages, which is quite something.
It really is. So the mission today.
Well, our mission today is highly analytical, as you said. We want to basically reverse engineer the backbone of Flesh.
Okay.
We're looking really closely at the authorial choices, specifically how Szalay uses these structural leaps, these big jumps, and distinct stylistic choices to move István through time and across borders, too.
Right, because he moves around a lot.
He does. And these choices are what convey the novel's major heavy themes. Displacement, definitely. The corrosive nature of borrowed wealth and that inescapable weight of consequence. We want to give you, the listener, a really precise, deep understanding of why this novel operates so powerfully. So we'll focus on the pacing, the character analysis, and that unique sort of episodic structure.
Okay, good. But before we throw ourselves into István's relentless trajectory, maybe let's just quickly situate the author, David Szalay.
Good idea.
He's already a recognized literary heavyweight, isn't he? Known for his ability to write these sprawling narratives that somehow feel like collections of really tightly wound short stories.
That's a great way to put it. Like his debut, London in the Southeast, that got him significant praise.
And of course, All That Man Is, shortlisted for the Booker.
Right. Big deal. So Flesh, published in 2025, it definitely continues that celebrated body of work. He's really marked himself out as a master chronicler of contemporary rootlessness, I'd say, and masculinity under pressure.
Definitely masculinity under pressure. And we should probably acknowledge the book's aesthetic framing, too. The cover art.
Oh, yeah, absolutely, because it immediately signals Szalay's thematic intentions, doesn't it?
It feels very deliberate.
It is. The cover art is a fascinating choice. It's Mars and Venus, allegory of peace, painted way back in 1770 by Louis-Jean-François Lagrenay, and it's profoundly provocative.
That detail is key, I think, because given the novel's focus on intense, unceasing conflict, both domestic and physical conflict, I mean, István's life is just defined by violence, whether he's inflicting it or suffering it. So that title, Allegory of Peace, it instantly suggests this deep, ironic contrast to the chaos inside the book.
Exactly. It's almost like a taunt, isn't it? Promising the serenity that István absolutely never achieves.
Never gets close.
It sets a tone, aspiration versus reality, maybe? And speaking of reality, you can almost draw a small, suggestive thread between the author's own life and the novel's central theme of mobility.
Ah, interesting. How so?
Well, Szalay himself, he was born in Canada, grew up in London, and now lives in Vienna.
Okay.
So this personal history of mobility, of crossing borders, of maybe seeking a home that never quite fully materializes, it subtly mirrors the core dilemma for István, doesn't it?
Yeah, that makes sense. István's life is defined by constantly trying to move upward, outward, searching for validation, trying to fit into some new social context or class or country.
Only to be rejected or sort of pulled back down again?
Right. So we have an author who perhaps understands displacement on some level, setting up this life for his protagonist that's just defined by rupture, by breaks.
Precisely. Which brings us to how that life begins, a life that starts, as you mentioned, with a literal bang and an instant moral crisis.
Okay, let's dive into that opening, part one, the hook.
Right. So Szalay begins Flesh with absolutely zero preamble, no easing you in.
No messing around.
None, which is crucial, I think, for immediately establishing the novel's pace and its kind of relentless feel. Chapter 1 starts in media res, smack bang in the middle of a huge life chain. István is 15. He's relocating to a new town, a new school. And this isn't just presented as, oh, a tough moment. It feels like a traumatic disruption. 15 is such a difficult age for that kind of upheaval, isn't it? The social order feels so fixed then.
Totally. You feel like everyone else knows the rules and you don't.
Exactly. And he struggles intensely to make connections. He finds companionship eventually, but only with one other boy who the text describes simply as another solitary individual.
So the immediate theme hits you straight away. Profound isolation. But that isolation almost instantly spirals into this devastating narrative about, well, internal inadequacy. It happens really fast.
It does, because this one friend he makes, he immediately introduces this hyper-masculine metric that's going to haunt István for years.
Right. The friend talks about sex really easily, confidently. He brags about masturbating 4 or 5 times a day, which seems a lot.
It does. And István, who only manages it, once or twice, is instantly judged, put down.
Yeah, the friend just dismisses him, doesn't he? He says, you must have a weak sex drive.
Exactly. And what we see there is Szalay establishing István's deep, fundamental sense of internal inadequacy right from the get-go. Not through, deep psychological narration.
No.
But through this competitive, quantified, and frankly, completely arbitrary measure of what it supposedly means to be a man.
That specific detail, it's such a devastating literary hook, isn't it? Because it shows István is already operating from a deficit.
Yeah.
He hasn't got a stable peer group to define what's normal or okay.
Nope.
He only has his own experience, which is immediately judged and found wanting. It makes him utterly dependent on external validation from that point on, it feels like.
And that dependence is precisely what sets the stage for the inciting incident. István's attempt to seek that external validation through a sexual encounter with a girl. Basically an encounter designed to prove he isn't inadequate.
Yeah, he's trying to measure up.
Exactly. It ends in total, crushing humiliation.
And the rejection itself is brutal, but it's also mediated, isn't it? It's
Yeah.
reported secondhand by the friend, which somehow makes it even colder, more clinical.
It really does. She said you weren't sexy. That's what she said. And then the friend doubles down, adding, she said you didn't seem up for it.
Oof. That's just an unanswerable, core-shattering blow for a 15-year-old boy trying to figure out his identity.
It is. It's the first major rejection that István just cannot process or fight back against. And it becomes a pivotal moment, a real turning point.
His isolation just deepens after that, doesn't it?
Absolutely. It pushes him to seek validation in a totally different, almost sheltered context. He pivots. He forms this unusual relationship with a lady in his apartment building, one of those prefabricated concrete blocks.
And the description of this lady is really intentional, I think. She's described as old and ugly, according to István's, harsh teenage judgment.
And the relationship starts transactionally, almost silently. It's built around these weekly trips to the supermarket where he helps her carry home her groceries.
So it provides this strange functional intimacy first.
Yeah, until she shifts the dynamic with that surprising, softly whispered question, "Can I kiss you?"
Such a shift.
A huge shift. The text just pivots. It moves from this functional silence to surprising physical intimacy. And later it escalates, becoming more explicit. Do you want to kiss me properly?
Okay. So this relationship, despite the descriptions making the woman seem, well, physically unappealing to a typical teenager,
Yeah.
it offers István that desperately needed sexual agency and validation that the girl denied him.
Precisely. And Szalay even subtly suggests that the almost clinical, maybe slightly transgressive nature of the encounter might have intensified István's attraction, perhaps playing into his feeling of already existing outside the normal rule.
Right. And crucially, this affair is hidden. It's secret.
Totally secret.
It continues in secret. Sometimes István is just lying there on her bed, feeling the rain outside, looking at the underside of a pine shelf above him. Mundane details grounding this secret life.
And he creates this perfect internal logic for himself, doesn't he? This self-justification.
Yeah, as long as no one knows about it, it's like it isn't really happening. It's like it exists in the same way that his fantasies exist.
It's an insulated space he creates, completely divorced from consequence, he thinks.
But Szalay immediately shatters that insulation. Bang. The climax of Chapter 1 arrives when the lady's husband returns home unexpectedly.
Okay. The inevitable complication.
Yes. And István, initially, his fear is consumed by this tiny, almost absurd detail. The husband works at a cigarette factory and had offered István a cigarette once before.
Right.
His immediate worry is that the husband might mention this tiny interaction to István's mother, exposing the whole affair through this mundane channel.
That's interesting. The fear isn't about the husband's violence initially, but about social exposure.
Exactly. But then, a few days later, he tries to see the lady one last time. He knocks on the door. The husband opens it, recognizes him, and quickly tries to shut it again.
And István reacts.
Instinctively, he pushes the door open.
And that's it. The point of no return.
Absolutely. In the confrontation that follows, István pushes the husband down the concrete stairs. And Szalay gives us the full, grim, physical detail. The man hits his head on the metal handrail, lies motionless near his wife's plant pots, spilling soil onto the concrete floor. Just still.
Okay. So structurally, the genius of this incident, as you called it, is the ambiguity that follows.
Yes, the enduring narrative ambiguity surrounding István's intent. He just walks away, shaking, past neighbors who heard the commotion but didn't see clearly.
And the police.
The police eventually find him. They deliver the news. The man is dead.
Right. And the core question that Szalay forces us, the reader, to confront, and which István himself clearly struggles with for his entire life, is intention. Did he mean for that to happen?
Exactly. When the police ask him, if it was an accident, why didn't you call an ambulance? István has no answer. He just can't articulate it.
And the text itself confirms this uncertainty, doesn't it? Something like...
Yeah, it says explicitly, he did push him down the stairs. And it's hard to say what his intention was. He carries this dark feeling that maybe he did want the man dead in that split second, but his self-protective memory instantly starts blurring the event, almost rewriting it.
So this inability to definitively know if he committed murder or manslaughter or just some act of spontaneous, maybe defensive violence, it sets the precedent for István's lifelong, highly ambivalent relationship with consequence.
Perfectly put. It establishes that his most transformative, most destructive actions will always seem to reside in this morally gray area, forever undermining his own sense of self, his own narrative.
Okay, so that's a hell of an opening. It hooks you, sets the stakes, and introduces this core ambiguity.
Definitely. Which leads us into part 2, how Szalay structures the rest of this life, the narrative architecture itself.
Right, and the structural foundation of Flesh is absolutely critical to understanding István's psychological state, I think. Szalay uses a non-linear, highly episodic structure.
Which is maybe the only way to really convey that profound rootlessness you mentioned earlier, that lack of continuity in his life.
I think so. It fundamentally rejects the idea of a smooth chronological biography. And then this happened, and then that happened.
Right. Instead, the narrative operates through these massive, really drastic chronological leaps between the chapters.
Huge leaps. Chapter 1, as we said, compressed, violent teenage years ending with the killing.
Yeah.
Then Chapter 2 immediately jumps forward. Suddenly we're with him in his early 20s, spending time in a young offenders institution, meeting characters like Udin.
Okay.
Then Chapter 3 leaps again. Now we're dealing with the end of his 5 years of army service, the trauma of Iraq, and his messy, messy return home.
So this creates a very fragmented reading experience, doesn't it? Where each chapter feels less like part of a continuous story, and more like a deeply detailed, almost self-contained vignette, a snapshot.
Exactly. We don't witness the mundane stuff, the connective tissue of István's life, the slow growth, the quiet decisions, the boring bits in between.
No, we only catch the peaks and troughs, the abrupt, disruptive episodes that fundamentally redefine who he is or the social context he's trying to navigate.
And this rapid episodic pacing perfectly mirrors a life defined by ruptures, by being constantly forced to adapt to completely new, often high-stakes environments, rather than experiencing slow, organic growth or stability.
And what's fascinating, too, is the variation in pacing within those self-contained episodes. Like in Chapter 1, his critical adolescence, the loneliness, the friendship, the rejection, the affair, the killing, it feels hyper-compressed, almost suffocatingly intense, like too much consequence crammed into too little time.
Yeah, it's breathless. But then compare that to the pacing we find in, say, Chapter 3 after his army deployment in Iraq.
Okay.
Here, Szalay shifts the rhythm dramatically. The narrative alternates between these periods of long, drawn-out, almost unbearable boredom.
Right, like the waiting around in Kuwait.
Exactly, that endless waiting, followed by sudden, chaotic bursts of activity that seem designed to almost jolt the protagonist and the reader back to life.
You really feel that exhaustive description of the holdup in Kuwait, waiting by the pool, looking at those 3 spiked towers, then the long, profoundly uncomfortable journey home.
Lying on the floor at Ali al-Salem Air Base, surrounded by the absurdity of military logistics, baskets of Snickers bars everywhere, no allocated seating on this unmarked American plane.
Yeah, and that specific sensory detail, the feeling of the wet patch on his T-shirt where he drooled during a shallow sleep, it just grounds that profound fatigue and boredom so well. You feel it.
You really do, but then snap. The action jerks violently back to the promise of a massive night out waiting for them back at Camp Babylon in Hungary.
But it's not a relaxing celebration, is it? It's described as this messy, chaotic blur.
Total blur. They're snorting speed off the plastic top of a toilet cistern in some sports pub. Predictably, it leads to a punch-up in the bar, and eventually István is found by the police just pissing against a wall, laughing uncontrollably.
And the narrator's commentary there is so insightful. It notes that this chaos is exactly what they wanted, just a normal night out after the war.
Yeah.
But then there are moments when the very normality of it feels like a sort of outrage.
And that right there is the essential psychological insight Szalay offers through this pacing. The intense trauma of the war, the things he's seen and done, has made true, quiet, continuous normality basically unreachable for István.
So the only way he can genuinely feel alive, or maybe connected to his peers even, is through these sudden chaotic bursts of high-stakes activity, the kind that momentarily puncture the post-war apathy and emotional numbness.
I think that's exactly it. The structure itself, the pacing, is mirroring the erratic nature of PTSD. The long lulls followed by explosive release.
Okay, so beyond the structure and the pacing, what about Skelly's writing style itself, the prose?
Well, it's incredibly precise, almost clinically observed, I'd say.
Yeah, clinical feels right.
The prose is very direct, very clear. It avoids rhetorical flourishes, fancy metaphors most of the time, which achieves this high degree of readability despite the dark, complex subject matter.
It keeps you hooked because it doesn't waste time, does it? It focuses only on what seems to matter in that moment.
Exactly. And what matters to Szalay stylistically are the minute sensory details, the things that anchor the character's rootless existence in a specific material reality.
Like?
Well, we're constantly grounded by these physical observations. The wet patch on his t-shirt we mentioned, the dead flies blurred in the strip lights of the school ceiling way back in Chapter 1, the smell of frying onions at the Sunday market later when he's in London.
Right. These specific, almost mundane details give a kind of material weight to a life that otherwise feels so emotionally untethered.
Precisely. And the relentless focus on physicality is key to the novel's title, isn't it? Flesh.
Absolutely. The writing frequently zooms right in on body parts, on physical sensations, on observations that are often slightly clinical or detached.
Yeah, think about István noting the lady's weird nipples back in Chapter 1, or the casual, almost detached observation of Thomas Nyman's blue lips during that final lethal scene near the end.
Even his mother's kitchen, years later, is recalled in exact detail, the tiles, the specific postcard he sent her from Kuwait stuck on the fridge. It's like his memory clings to objects and surfaces.
It does. And this detailed realism contrasts starkly with the dialogue, which is remarkably spare.
Very spare. Functional, mostly. It rarely conveys deep emotional complexity directly. We don't get long, reflective conversations where people unpack their feelings.
No. Instead, we learn about István's internal state, or lack thereof, through nonverbal cues. He is the absolute master of the shrug.
He shrugs constantly. Whenever he's asked a difficult internal question, when his mother asks why his grades slipped back then, or later in life why he punched the door, or crucially when Helen asks him about his time in the army.
What does he say?
He just says, I don't know, or he just shrugs. He physically shrugs away the difficult experience.
Which brings us neatly to the narrative perspective, because that reinforces his isolation too, doesn't it?
How so?
Well, the story sticks incredibly tightly to István's point of view. We get his internal monologue, which often reveals his self-doubt, his justifications, his isolation, like that thought. As long as no one knows about it, it's like it isn't really happening.
Right, we're inside his head for those rationalizations.
But the narrative strategy overall is to present a character who seems fundamentally incapable of articulating his deepest feelings or experiences to others. This recurring struggle to translate experience into words, it's a key symptom of his emotional detachment, maybe stemming from the trauma.
He struggled to translate feelings into words, even when he's directly prompted. Like when Helen Nyman asks him how the army was.
Yeah, what does he manage then?
He struggles and finally just manages, it was okay. And when she presses him, like, what does okay actually mean? He simply cannot elaborate, can't find the words.
It highlights that profound gap, doesn't it, between the trauma he carries, the things he's lived through, and the normal social context he's trying and failing to inhabit. That feeling of having these huge world-altering experiences that somehow have no reality here, as the book puts it.
Yeah. So Szalay grants us access only to István's private justifying logic, like secrecy equals consequence aversion. But because of the structural jumps and that really scarce dialogue, István is forced to exist primarily as an observer and a reactive actor.
Yeah.
He's always defined by external, high-stakes events, rarely by communicated internal reflection.
He's a man of action and highly specific observation, but almost never of explanation. That seems to be István's core function in this novel, his tragedy, Prek.
Which makes the jump into his London life and his attempts at social climbing feel quite logical in a way. If you can't fix the internal reality, you focus entirely on perfecting the external appearance.
Well, exactly, build the facade. Which takes us neatly into part 3, character analysis and the major themes.
Okay, let's delve deeper into István's psychological architecture, as you put it, starting with that early isolation and then moving into the defining trauma that really shaped his adult life, the military.
Right. The early isolation, no one to tell secrets to, spending time alone, difficulty making lasting friends, that's the bedrock, established in Chapter 1. But his 5 years of Army service, culminating in that Iraq deployment, that's the crucible. That's what truly hardens him and scars him.
And the incident involving his friend Riki near Al Sawara, that seems to be the core memory of his PTSD. Szalay renders it with terrifying clarity, doesn't he?
He does. István was on the second armored carrier. Riki was on the first, which got hit by an IED, an explosive device.
Yeah.
And István describes the explosion not primarily as sound, because as he notes, it fucks up your ears instantly.
Right.
But as pure physical pressure, a massive blow that just stops the whole convoy dead.
And the chaos afterwards.
Defined by István realizing he's gone deaf temporarily, seeing only the muzzle flashes of the other APCs firing through the smoke, smelling that burnt cordite. It's all sensory overload and deprivation at once.
And in that chaos, he ran to Riki.
He did. Despite his own physical disorientation and deafness, he ran to Riki, held him, told him it was going to be okay, even while knowing deep down it probably wasn't.
So the trauma is rooted in that belief that he failed.
Yeah.
That you should have saved him.
Exactly. That unresolved guilt surfaces years later, doesn't it? When he punches a door in London and breaks his hand.
Yeah, described almost like a physical spasm, an involuntary eruption of emotion, like throwing up a toxic feeling he can't otherwise express.
And when he goes to the hospital for the hand, there's that encounter.
Oh yeah, with the doctor who turns out to be an old schoolmate. Someone who recognizes him from way back.
Which just highlights the stark contrast between their life paths, doesn't it? The successful doctor versus István, there with a self-inflicted injury stemming from deep trauma.
Yeah. And he gets recommended for therapy then, right? First for PTSD back in Hungary, and then later for legal reasons in London after another incident.
That's right. The initial therapy in Hungary focuses specifically on challenging his self-blame regarding Riki's death.
How does that work?
The therapist makes him write down his repetitive, anxious thoughts, the intrusive thoughts, which invariably center on that idea. I could have done more to save Riki's life.
Okay.
And she systematically tries to dismantle this survivor's guilt. She points out the facts. He was further away from the blast than Riki's own driver, who was apparently paralyzed by shock, yet István was the one who acted instantly, who ran towards the danger.
Trying to give him an objective perspective on his own actions.
Exactly. And the Seroxat, the antidepressant the therapist prescribes, that's a really vital thematic element too, I think.
Yeah.
It introduces this idea of chemical detachment or maybe chemical coping.
Yeah, István finds it strange, doesn't he? To think that his profound, deep-seated feelings, anxiety, guilt, depression, might just be due to a deficiency of serotonin that can be fixed, or at least managed, by a tiny pill.
It feels too simple, maybe, but the pills do work to an extent. They make him feel less weighed down by everything, as the book says. They offer a temporary reprieve from that internal chaos.
But it is only temporary, isn't it? Which leads to a crucial question. If the Seroxat was working, why does he regress so violently? Why does he revert to that primal instinctive violence the moment Thomas Nyman confronts him publicly at the Gagosian Gallery later on?
That's the key point, isn't it? The therapy, the medication, they seem to have only masked the core issue. That internal rage, the inability to process emotion verbally, it's all still there, simmering.
Until external pressure forces it out in a violent outburst.
Exactly. It suggests maybe the material ambition, the drive for success in London became his real addiction, his real coping mechanism. And the therapy was just a temporary chemical coating over the unresolved trauma.
Which transitions us perfectly into that next major theme. His entry into London life, the pursuit of class, status, wealth.
Right. After 2 years working security, living in shared housing, noisy, near the train tracks, quite grim, István is aggressively ambitious for something more, something better.
And his big break comes accidentally, doesn't it? His accidental heroism saving Mervyn.
Yeah, Mervyn, the owner of the private security agency he ends up working for, István saves him from an assault in an alley. He just wades in instinctively after hearing a really normal-sounding call for help.
Not dramatic, just help.
Exactly. And this moment of uncalculated, raw competence, just dealing with the situation, physically places him squarely in Mervyn's orbit. Mervyn sees potential.
And Mervyn immediately starts grooming him, essentially,
Yeah.
turning him into this carefully polished reflection of the wealth he's supposed to protect.
That's a good way to put it. It's a calculated performance of status and controlled masculinity that Mervyn teaches him. He corrects István's manners, slow down when you light your cigarette, never say no problem, say my pleasure or whatever.
Little signifiers.
Tiny signifiers. But the most important instruction is about controlling his presence, his speech. Mervyn tells him explicitly, don't say anything unless I speak to you first. Become invisible but competent.
He's taught to fit in with the principal's lifestyle, to become this seamless part of the luxury backdrop, projecting control without ever seeming too intelligent or, God forbid, autonomous.
Exactly. And this adoption of status, this performance, is communicated almost entirely through material objects, which Szalay details with almost fetishistic precision.
Right, the status symbols. He starts driving the powerful cars, the Jaguar, then later the Mercedes S-Class, feeling the lush charcoal skin of the leather.
He buys the right clothes, black leather shoes from Russell and Bromley, identifying him as a certain type of London professional.
And the watches. The watches are huge.
Absolutely crucial. The Audemars Piguet, the vintage 1953 Rolex Submariner he gets later, these are not just timepieces. They're badges of borrowed honor, symbols of his arrival, his success.
Even his cigarette habit gets an upgrade, doesn't it?
Yeah.
He moves to increasingly expensive Kuwaiti Philip Morris brand cigarettes. Everything is curated.
Everything. And the Rainham property project developing flats out near the A13 becomes the ultimate manifestation of this ambition. His attempt to transition from being hired silent muscle to becoming a legitimate self-made property developer, to own the assets, not just guard them.
But crucially, this whole venture is financed by large, soft loans from the Nyman family trusts.
Exactly, which is precisely why it's a borrowed identity. It's entirely dependent on the trust's goodwill, on Helen Nyman's influence perhaps, not on István's own underlying capital or financial stability. He hasn't really made it yet.
Which brings us inevitably to the Nyman family dynamic, this vortex that dictates István's rise and his absolutely cataclysmic fall.
Right, he moves from being Helen Nyman's security driver, silent, watchful, to becoming her lover.
Where do they meet?
Usually in his small, relatively modest flat. The arrangement keeps the relationship contained, compartmentalized, separate from her life with her husband, Carl Nyman.
And what's in it for Helen? What's her motivation?
Escape, primarily, it seems. She uses him for intense physical validation, maybe. A total break from the sterile wealth and perhaps the impotence, emotional or otherwise, of her marriage to Carl.
She tells István she feels honored by him at one point, doesn't she?
She does, which suggests maybe he embodies a raw, authentic masculinity, or her idea of it, that the men in her privileged world lack.
And for István, what does he get out of it, beyond the physical?
Validation, definitely. Intense physical sensation, yes. But also access. Access to that elite world, the Nyman world, that he's so desperate to formalize his place within. Helen is his sponsor, in a way.
But the real antagonistic force in his life, the one who brings it all crashing down, isn't the distant, powerful husband, Carl.
No, it's not Carl. It's Helen's son from her first marriage, Thomas.
Thomas, the heir.
Exactly. He inherits control of the Nyman Trust when he turns 25, and he almost immediately identifies István as, well, an illegitimate drain on the family's resources, an outsider who has overstayed his welcome.
And Thomas weaponizes his newfound power ruthlessly, doesn't he?
Absolutely. He takes legal action to reclaim those soft loans István received for the Rainham project. He argues they were granted improperly, against the terms of the trust.
Which instantly pulls the rug out from under István financially.
Completely. It drives István towards financial ruin and eventually bankruptcy. The moment the source of his money, the Nyman Trust, is challenged, his entire material facade just crumbles with terrifying speed.
And the tension between them boils over publicly, spectacularly, at the Gagosian Gallery private view.
Ah, yes, the ultimate symbol of István's precarious social perch. He's there, trying to fit in amongst the art world elite.
And Thomas crashes it.
Drunk, enraged, he crashes the event, publicly accuses István and Helen in front of everyone of stealing from me. Total humiliation.
And here we see the failure of Mervyn's careful conditioning, the failure of the Sariksa to keep him calm, István's response.
Is that familiar, instinctive, primal violence we saw way back in Chapter 1. He physically throws Thomas to the floor. Right there, in the middle of the gallery, in front of the horrified art crowd.
No more controlled facade.
None. It's gone. And the consequence is immediate and devastating for his London life. István is arrested for common assault. He gets fined. And he's mandated to undergo therapy again, this time with a new therapist, Rafeh.
So this incident marks the definitive collapse of his success, his social standing in London. It's all over.
Pretty much. Yet István's hatred for Thomas after this becomes deep, almost psychotic, it feels like. He holds Thomas entirely responsible for the legal disaster, the social ruin, the financial catastrophe that follows.
And this hatred builds towards István's final, calculated act of vengeance, an act which brings his whole moral arc to this devastating close.
Yes. Post-bankruptcy, after he's lost everything, István starts tracking Thomas in London.
He follows him.
He follows the black BMW hire car, the limousine that picked Thomas up from a hospital in Cambridge. He eventually locates him in a quiet mews house in Islington.
And what does he see?
István observes Thomas through a small gap in the curtains of this rather underfurnished house. He sees Thomas wearing just a dressing gown, heating something on a spoon with a lighter.
Oh.
A scene István instantly recognizes. From his time in Iraq, maybe from his subsequent time in detention, he knows exactly what he's seeing. Thomas injects the liquid.
And the chilling, precise details Szalay gives us here. It's István's cool, almost clinical recognition of the signs of overdose, isn't it?
Exactly. He watches as Thomas lies back on the sofa. The syringe slides from his hand, his lips turn distinctly blue. István knows what asphyxiation looks like. He recognizes that Thomas has taken too much and is, without intervention, definitely dying.
And this is the ultimate test, isn't it, of István's lifelong ambivalence towards consequence. He faces essentially the same moral choice he faced as a teenager on those concrete stairs. Call an ambulance, intervene, face the potential music, or walk away and let fate or his own malice decide the outcome.
And he chooses inaction. Again, he chooses inaction. He stands there. He doesn't act. He doesn't press the doorbell, doesn't call for help, the very failure, perhaps, he was already haunted by from his adolescence with the neighbor.
He just chooses to leave Thomas to die, alone in that empty room. And his justification is purely internal, detached. He tells himself his thoughts were somewhere far away, a complete disengagement.
And this cold, calculated inaction feels far more destructive morally than the ambiguous, maybe impulsive violence of his youth. The teenage István might have been driven by instinct and fear. The adult István here seems driven by calculated passive malice, fully recognizing the consequence and choosing it anyway.
It completes that tragic cycle of violence and detachment that began right back in Chapter 1, just darker.
Colder. And the consequence of this act, this final silence, seals his final material fall. István is declared bankrupt, loses absolutely everything.
The projects, the Bentley he was driving, the luxury watches, all the signifiers of his borrowed identity, gone.
Gone. He and his mother retreat. They return to the very town in Hungary where István grew up. Starting over, or maybe just ending, in his mother's small apartment in that same kind of prefabricated estate he started in.
But the personal tragedy layered on top of this is far greater than the financial ruin, isn't it? The greatest loss, which Szalay revealed slowly, devastatingly.
Is the death of István's son, Jacob, and Helen.
Both together.
Both died together in a car accident. Helen apparently swerved to avoid a fox on Homerswood Lane, lost control. Just gone.
The loss of Jacob, the son István seemed genuinely proud of, and Helen, the woman who was probably a far more significant emotional anchor for him than he ever realized.
It defines his final years completely. He retreats into depression, heavy drinking. He believes alcohol makes the unbearable situation feel less real somehow. The ghosts of his past Reiki, the neighbor, Thomas, now Helen and Jacob, they're all fully materialized now. There's no escape.
He returns to a life of simple labor, working shifts at a local supermarket. After his mother eventually dies, he lives completely alone in her small flat, surrounded by the ghosts of his youth and his failed London life.
And the narrative ends with that final, really poignant, maybe pathetic moment. He has a short, somewhat empty affair with the local woman, Bori.
Yeah. And he finds this strange, sad comfort in reminiscing about Helen, masturbating while looking at an old photo of her from Munich, thinking she would be happy, His word to know he still thought of her in that intense physical way.
It's such a bleak ending. His life has completed this grim material circle, ending exactly where it started in that prefab housing estate.
Yeah. But now defined not by teenage inadequacy, but by profound, total, irreversible internal loss. Just emptiness.
So when we try to synthesize the entire arc of Flesh, Shalay's central argument about class, identity, maybe masculinity too, it becomes brutally clear, doesn't it?
Yeah. Istvan's success, his identity as a property developer, his social standing, the luxury items, even his family structure with Helen and Jacob, it was never truly his own, was it?
Never. It was a temporary, borrowed status, entirely dependent on the Nyman family's trust, their tolerance, their capital.
The moment Thomas, the true heir, challenged those soft loans and reclaimed the capital, Istvan's entire material identity just collapsed with unnerving speed.
It evaporated. He went from driving a Bentley, negotiating deals with ministers, wearing a Rolex,
To being declared bankrupt, losing the watches, and being forced back to stocking shelves in a supermarket. The borrowed life was simply recalled, wasn't it?
Exactly. Proving that class identity, at least in this modern, perhaps ruthless context Szalay portrays, is only as stable as the financial structure underpinning it. Take away the money, the identity vanishes.
But the borrowing goes deeper than just finance, doesn't it? It feels emotional and psychological, too.
I think so. Even his ability to cope, however imperfectly, with Riki's death and his PTSD that seemed dependent on external forces too. The therapist, the Sarexat, Mervin's highly structured, demanding environment.
Right. When that external scaffolding vanished, he just reverted, didn't he? To his core, isolated self, defined by that instinctive violence and deep emotional detachment.
Culminating in that chilling final act or non-act against Thomas.
Szalay masterfully explores this burden of the past, this weight, and the profound emotional rootlessness that just permeates Istvan's entire life. What makes the novel so haunting, I think, is the extreme specificity of the details we talked about.
The brands, the precise car journeys, the food he eats, the physical observations.
Yeah, all of that serves to anchor a life that is otherwise defined by this profound emotional void, this emptiness. The materialism is so vivid, so sharp, that the reader feels the internal emptiness all the more acutely by contrast.
It creates this stark, undeniable contrast, doesn't it? Between Istvan's inner, haunted life full of guilt over Riki, guilt over the neighbor, maybe guilt or just coldness over Thomas, grief for Helen and Jacob, and the hyper-specific materialistic world he constantly tries and ultimately fails to occupy.
Which leaves us, maybe, with a final provocative thought for you, the listener, to mull over as you reflect on Flesh.
Okay.
What does it truly mean that Istvan, having been a killer, intentionally or not, a decorated soldier suffering from PTSD, a failed businessman, a grieving father and partner, finds his most profound, maybe his only truly honest emotional connection at the very end?
Yeah.
Not with the men he served with, not with Mervyn, not even truly with Helen while she was alive, but in sharing the painful, traumatic, complicated story of his collapsed life, his dead wife, his dead son, his brief helicopter wealth, all of it with Bori.
The cashier from the supermarket.
Yeah. A virtual stranger, a cashier in a small Hungarian town he's returned to in defeat. Is that strange, almost random confession the only form of true validation? Or maybe just unburdening he ever finds?
Yeah.
And is it precisely because it happened only after the entire performance of success had completely, irrevocably failed?
That's a heavy thought to end on. The confession only possible after the collapse.
Something to think about.